This is John Jackson Miller. I'm the founder and curator of Comichron.com, the world's largest public database of comic book sales figures, here with the sales charts preview for July 2018. As usual, these numbers begin from data that comes from Diamond Comic Distributors, and then we work some analysis on it to bring you the sales figures for the month. And we will say about July 2018 that the headline of the month is that the big two win big. It's been a while since we've been able to say that both Marvel and DC did significantly better than their sales from the year previous, but we kind of knew going into July 2018 that this would be a pretty good opportunity for that to happen. July 2017 was one of the worst months of that year, and it was looked at this year as a very reachable target, and indeed it was, because Marvel, its 2018 July versus 2017 is up 16% in dollars, and that's graphic novels and comics together in terms of what retailers ordered. And then over at DC, July versus July, it's an even better picture, up 29%. The market overall, July 2018 versus 2017, ends up netting up 10%. This is a very good showing. It's reminiscent of the showings we had earlier in the spring when we had Action 1000 and also Amazing Spider-Man 800 come out. And it gives us our third out of 4 months that the sales for the market are up. We just were down in June. And this is the first time that we've had 3 out of 4 months that have increases since back in 2016 when we had the DC Rebirth line going. So it's a fairly good run. You'll note that 10% is worse than either Marvel or DC did. This means that Marvel and DC are both outpacing the market overall. And we'll get into some of the other market shares for other publishers in just a moment. Looking at the numbers versus the previous month, now this is just July versus June. As noted, June was a down month, but it was a pretty good month for graphic novels. July beat that month by 6%, so it is a fairly good showing there. Comics up 14% in dollars, 7% in units. And then up 6% in dollars, 6.55% in units overall, and that's just comparing against June 2018. To go back and compare against July 2017, the same month the previous year, it's a much better picture yet, because again, July of 2017, as mentioned, was a really bad month. We see that comics dollars are up 17%, comics units up 10%. Graphic novels still off, 9% dollars, 5% units. The difference between dollars and units there indicates that there's some deep discounting going on that we'll see once we get to the actual full top 500 figures that will appear on Comichron. And then overall, it's 9.53% increase in dollars, 9.27% increase in units versus the same month previous year. And then when we go to the year-to-date, we will see that the shortfall has been cut down to just a little under 2% year-to-year, and it's closer to 7% in units. But again, that is continuing to head in the right direction, clawing back the losses that we suffered in the wintertime. And we'll notice that comics as a category in dollars is now in positive territory for the year, up a little over 0.75%. When we look at the market shares, we'll see that Marvel and DC are the leaders in dollars. It's 39% for Marvel, 31% for DC. Image, 8.5%. IDW up to 4.5%. That's a recovery. What we had with IDW in the month of June was a much smaller slate that came out. They just had 19 comics come out in the month of June, which is the lowest number for IDW in the last 6 or 7 years. Well, this month it was 56. So that is back to normal for IDW. and it is triple the size of the comic slate, and that certainly helps out the market share. And we see all the top 10 here: Marvel, DC, Image, IDW, Dark Horse, followed by Boom, Dynamite, Viz, Titan, and Archie. Probably right below that is going to be Valiant and Random House and Oni, somewhere in that order. We will know when we see the final estimates on Comichron here. One consequence of Marvel and DC doing so much better than the rest of the market at the moment is that when we get to the actual dollar shares and combine Marvel plus DC, we get 70.69%. That is the largest amount of market share that Marvel and DC together have had since October 2011. And October 2011, of course, was the second month of the New 52 at DC. So, that was a month where Marvel was just its regular large self, and then DC had suddenly ballooned upward because it had all these new comics sold. So again, this has happened over time. There was, of course, a time in the 1980s where Marvel alone was 70%. So, I think it's pretty normal that in a recovery, we would see Marvel and DC doing better in the beginning before it begins spreading out to all of the other publishers. Now, what comics fueled the sales in the month of June? Well, obviously, the big one that came out on July 4th was Batman number 50. That's the number one comic book in units and dollars. This is this wedding issue, Batman and Catwoman. And it is a title that, when we look at the other books in the list, Batman is number one. Amazing Spider-Man number one. That's another launch. Is in second place. Captain America number one, yet another fresh start launch from Marvel. That's in third place. A Doomsday Clock issue gets in here. That's issue 6. That is in fourth place. And then Brian Bendis' Superman launch number 1 is in fifth. And when we look at the full list of units, we'll see that Marvel and DC split that list exactly evenly. 5 for Marvel, 5 for DC. And when we look at the dollars list, we'll notice that it's the same exact list of titles. Now, you may notice that a comic book is not listed here, which was something that did make a big splash in the month. This, of course, is Die, Die, Die number 1. This is this Robert Kirkman, Chris Burnham title that was launched by surprise for retailers, not solicited in Diamond previews. It just showed up the second week of July. And it is a book that we're certain did well. We know that the number of copies that it sold were supposed to be tagged to the sales of Oblivion Song number 1 back in March. That sold over 80,000 units. We expect that that's probably what went into the market for this title. We also know that this particular issue also led the reorders that retailers placed in the month of July for a couple of weeks. Those are charts that always appear every week on Comichron as well. And so whatever ranking it wound up in, everything else that we just saw on this page back here is above it. So that's a fairly good sign that you got 10 comics that sold over at least 80,000 copies. And of course, the actual number will be on Comichron. Just go to the link that is in the description of this video once that number is announced. Graphic novels, so we'll see that Batman Volume 6, this is Bride or Burglar. This obviously ties in with the whole wedding storyline. That was the number 1 graphic novel in units. So that gives you a Batman title at the top of both of the sales charts, both comics and graphic novels. Infinity Gauntlet is number 2, and this thing is already the number 1 best-selling graphic novel of the year, despite having come out many years ago. This is the effect of the movie, the Avengers film. It is right there, first or second place, just about every single month in the charts, and it has been the number 1 trade paperback in reorders just about every week as well. So that is something where it's even though it's not a new graphic novel, it's kind of the Watchmen of 2018. in terms of its presence on the list. Venomized is number 3, Star Wars Dr. Aphra number 4. Viz has a couple of titles here in 6th and 7th place, One Punch Man and Dragon Ball. Ms. Marvel Volume 9, Teenage Wasteland, is in 8th place. That's a really good showing for a 9th volume of a series. And, of course, that's a series that makes much more of its money from the graphic novels than it does from the comics. We have Wolverine Old Man Logan, Volume 7, in 9th place, and Rocket Raccoon and Groot in 10th. Now, the dollars list is going to show a different leading title. And, of course, this is Avengers by Hickman, Volume 2. This is a $125 book, and it leads a list where almost everything is, $24, $25 or more. Now, of course, Batman Volume 6, Bride or Burglar, is the least expensive book on this list, but it sold so many units that it was able to wind up in 4th place. And even Infinity Gauntlet at $25 is up in 7th place. Here amid these omnibuses that have $75, $150 price tags. So, again, graphic novel dollar sales are still down relative to the previous year, but we are now only just talking about shortfalls in the single digits as opposed to the teens and 20s, which were numbers that we saw last year. This final chart here is what the publishers shipped to market. Publishers sent 478 new comic books to the retailers this month, and this is down 2%, or just about 8 comic books, versus the previous July. And again, this speaks well for the efficiency of the market because, unit and dollar sales were up for comics despite the fact that there were fewer comics on the market. Graphic novels, just slightly more graphic novels. I think 11 more graphic novels went to market, 321 this July versus the previous July. So these are not really big swings one direction or another, and it makes July versus July a pretty even comparison. As we approach August, we're going to have another month in 2017 to compare against that was not very good. So, we're actually, just with the July numbers here this year, almost up to where August 2017 was, despite the fact that August 2017 had one extra shipping week. So if the market does do as well each week in August as it did in July of 2018, that could be very good news for the market, and it might well have a shot at recovering a lot of what is left to erase of the deficit from this winter. Now, the numbers, once they are finally out, which should be just a couple of days after the release of this video, will be on Comichron.com. Just go to the monthly comic sales page and look for the link that we will add there for July. And you can find the link to the monthly comic sales from just about any page on the site. So until next time, this is John Jackson Miller, and I'll see you in the comic shop.